Now, for those of you who went on the walking tour on Tuesday or have had a walk around the city over the last few days, and you may have noticed that it looks a little different in some places. I'm not just talking about all the orange cones everywhere in our city centre, but Tamaki City Centre Waterfront has finally been transformed from a place for cars to a place for people, and one that reconnects us back to the Waitemata. I'd now like to invite onto the stage Phil Wihongi, until recently Māori Design Lead for Auckland Council's Design Office, Scott Greenhill from Land Lab, David Irwin from Isthmus Group, Rachel DeLambert from Boffin School, to share with us some thoughts around the City Centre Design Collective and the Downtown Infrastructure Development Programme.
E te ti, e te tā, koro mā, kui mā, tōkana mā, teina mā, rauranga tira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Katoa ki nei, tēnei maramara o rahiri, o hine amu noki, ka poto te mihi ki a koutou katoa. He mihi anō, ki ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohi a Tamaki Makaurau, Tamaki Kaina Ika me whenua katoa, Tamaki whenua parekura, Tamaki kai tai kauri, te mea, te mea, te mea. Tēnei wahi ātāhua. Nei rā te mihi ki a koutou katoa. Ngāti whātua ora kei, o mātou iwi manaki, mō tēnei hui huinga, tēnei whakanui o Tuia Pito ora. Nei te mihi, nei te mihi, nei te mihi. Kia ora everybody. It is with pleasure that I stand here today to be able to address you all. I acknowledge all of the speakers who have spoken before us today and yesterday, and thank you all for the wisdom that you've brought to us all, the experiences and the knowledge that you've brought for all of us to dine upon. It is a well-known whakatauki that the kai, the tino kai o te rangatira is kōrero, so we've been heartily fed over the last couple of days, and I look forward to the rest of our conference. As Henry has alluded to, until recently I was held a position at the Auckland Council, Te Kaunihira Tamaki Makaurau, and I was part of a team who were involved in the planning, the delivery of the downtown program, of which we were very fortunate to have aligned council to have aligned itself with a number of our leading design firms who are represented well within this room. But it's great that if you have been down there to have had a look at the projects that now link the waterfront to our city centre. There's a new relationship there which provides a mana that didn't exist before. The program was a really complex landscape that we were operating within. We had two local government agencies and possibly agendas We had 5 design studios, we had 15 mana whenua groups, we had a bunch of constructors, we had really tight time frames, and we had a modest budget to deliver all of this. The program was the culmination of a number of strategies set down by council, from downtown framework to the city centre master plan, so it dated quite a while back. And the drivers for the program were we needed to replace the failing seawall. There was an exchange that was made with Commercial Bay to sell part of QE2 public space and QE2 Square to Commercial Bay to enable that development to occur, which there was compensation for, which needed to be reinvested into public amenity, public open space in that area. In 2021, remember the bright lights of 2021, we were anticipating APEC being here. We were anticipating AC36 when we were doing our planning. So there was a real drive to have everything together really quickly, and really high public expectation that ran with that. So it was a really challenging landscape that we were working within. Council, there's kind of 4 things that I'll run you through that I think were major about the downtown program. We did things a little bit differently from a council perspective. The first thing was that the council made a decision to invest trust and faith in our design firms. Rather than taking the normal proposal, the process of looking for an overseas star architect or star landscape architect to come in and help us, tell us about what we wanted, who we wanted to be, what we wanted to look like and how we wanted to function, made a conscious decision that we would invest in our firms. So firms that were tapped, the criteria were that they had to have a studio in Tamaki Makaurau, and therefore donating a commitment to this place, and a commitment to working in a collaborative manner. One of the things we were really keen on doing was installing place as client rather than council being the client. So council actually became part of this thing which became the City Centre Design Collective, a component of that, with place becoming the client. Here we go. Here's another person having difficulties. There. So that was the first thing. As part of that commitment to or recognition of our design practices, we were taking a long view. As council, we were taking a long view, and one of the key things in that long view that we were looking for was to raise the cultural competency and the ability of our design firms in the long term to be able to engage in a way that we thought was befitting this most beautiful of places that we get to live in every day. So the City Centre Design Collective. The program approach, so there was a number of projects that were brought together in the first instance and bundled up as a program, which gave us a number of advantages in doing that. It gave us a collaborative focus, which enabled us to set out some high-level thinking, some high-level drivers, some high-level values that were laid out across the entire area. So rather than within a project, all of the projects were elevated into this program view. It allowed us to set out some of the larger drivers that we maintained for the program. So you've heard a few times over the course of the last couple of days about this moving from Auckland to Tamaki Makaurau. That was one of the major drivers, and that was the challenge that we set to the design firms at the start, to articulate what that actually meant for each of the design firms to be part of. What is your place within that? How do you think we can get there? What do we need? Those sorts of questions. So they all had to respond to that. I think It caused a bit of grief for a few of them in the first instance, but it's a challenge that's taken on a life of its own, and it's a great driver for us here in the city. It gave us a vehicle for collective design and critique. So the design teams were working in a collective manner. Mike, you'll see you over there. Working in a collective way. So the high-level design thinking was done together, around a table together, setting those high-level things. Auckland to Tamaki Makaurau. This notion of manaakitanga that was developed through it. So how do we design a place that is open, inviting, responsive, and is of sufficient mana for those who live here and for those that we want to invite here? How do we do that? The other large one that we were looking at was this notion of miharo. Miharo, again, Elena's alerted this morning, the need for not trying to translate, because it doesn't really translate. Miharo, the closest thing that I can come to is it's a sense of the extraordinary. So it's chasing something that's better than good, that's better than excellent, it's extraordinary. And I think with that one we were able to achieve that in a number of different things. It wasn't intended to run across everything, it was to have moments of mihara. The program approach also gave us a real sense of that we're all up together. So rather than council sitting in some hierarchy, we were sitting down at the table with the design firms in amongst it. Looking at the ecologies of place. So how we bring the ecologies of place together. So the social ecology, how do we interface the social ecology with the natural ecology, with the economic ecology, with the cultural ecology? How do we do that? So these were the challenges we set ourselves. The program approach also, in setting those high level drivers and understandings across the teams, it wasn't trying to get a sense of consistency. That was the very inverse of what we were trying to achieve. But what we were trying to achieve, and what we have achieved by adopting that approach, is that it's allowed us to develop a sense of coherency rather than the consistency. Respects each of the projects and each of the contexts they sit within. The third major that we had, that I think, was the cultural competency uplift and the support throughout the program. The first collective event that we had, we took everybody in a bus up to a small place in Northland, Kaihu. We were fortunate to align ourselves with tohunga. He's a tohunga in gumboots. He's the best kind of tohunga. Bernard Makware and his wife Hinarangi Himona. So we engaged, the program engaged them to help us lift collectively to get ready to go into the engagement with mana whenua. What that looked like was a series of, as part of our workshops, a series of wānanga with Bernard to, the object of them was not to tell us what to think, it wasn't trying to tell us how to design, but it was more about challenging us to think in a different way and approach design in a different way than what we would normally do. But it was centred on readying us to go into mana whenua. I think the other thing that was important about that was we had embedded Māori design support across the whole life of the program. So there was a constant, for both for mana whenua and for the design firms, there was a constant. There was someone holding that kaupapa for the whole thing. The last thing I'll talk briefly to was a mana whenua design partnership that we had. It was a different approach for council. We were committed to it. It was resourced, and it was really immersive. But going back to that long-term investment that we were trying to achieve through the program, it was about trying to grow and to cement understanding and the relationship between the firms and mana whenua. So to collaboratively work together to develop this concept of tamaki makaurau. Now what that's about, it's not about trying to go back to a pre-1840 context. It's not about that. It's not that tamaki makaurau. It's the tamaki makaurau in the future. It's the tamaki makaurau that's the place that's desired by many. It's the tamaki makaurau that's open. It's an invitation to everybody. There's a place for it, in it, for everybody. Immersive looks like, I stopped counting at 140 separate design engagements with mana whenua over that three and a bit years. So they were walking sites, shoulder to shoulder, butter paper and studios. They were sharing kai. They were practicing protocols. It was a deeply immersive experience. And design came out of it. Design bubbled naturally out of it, and has delivered what we've delivered. So those are the four things for me. My learned colleagues here will talk briefly about their, and maybe they'll have more luck with the. There we go. I'll just briefly talk about it. So this thing here, just one of the things that we were really keen on was about mana. How can we bring mana to every single thing that we do as the collective? And this taongi here was something that was created by Bernard for us. So in our hui, we were calling time. We would have an allotted period of time, and we would do the immortal. And so what we decided was, actually there's no mana in that. There isn't the mana that's what we're talking about here at this table deserves more mana than that. So this is how we mark that. This is the mana that we brought to that simple action as a demonstration of our commitment to it. I don't think that. I think that everyone involved will agree that we didn't get it all right, and nor should we have expected to, because it was really challenging what we set ourselves to undertake and deliver. But I would strongly argue that we got it righter than we ever got it before. And the importance of that is that it gives us a tangible marker on that journey. Our collective journey from Auckland to tamaki makaurau, and there's much value and much mana in that. The last thing before I hand over to looks like Scott is I just want to mention that during the course of the program we lost two very influential figures that participated in the program. Rochelle Kahui McConnell and Megan. We miss them both. Good on.
Kia ora, Phil. I'm just going to put my other hat on for a second before I get... David's going to come up and talk a little bit about his experiences, and Te Wananga, and Scott's going to talk to Key Street, and Rachel's got a few words to share too. But it was a really rewarding and enjoyable experience, and for the firms, Bofema School, ISPIS, JazzMax and Landlab and Rates to kind of all be in a room together was something we'd never really done before, because probably we all compete with each other. And one of the things that sticks out for me is us all standing in a bus stop together in Wellsford, practicing our waiata on our way up north to the marae, and so it's been a really wonderful experience. So kia ora, Phil, for your efforts in putting that program together.
I'm going to no, I think the slides are Scott's next. So I'm going to just add in a few experiences on the collective side, because I think it was an amazing time to be part of something. But it was, Phil explains it as if we all knew what we were doing, and we didn't. It sort of evolved from an idea from Phil and Tim Fitzpatrick, Tim Fitz as we know, and that being that it was a conceptual idea of forming a collective, and we all went in it with these really amazing projects on the possibilities that could be there, and went in there, I think, with all the right attitude. But we didn't. It was completely different to what we thought that we would, what it might be. And there were many coffees had between, particularly Henry, who just has his studio is just up the road at the time, just from us, and we would meet down for coffee at All Press and compare notes of how we thought we were going and how things were happening. And the biggest thing was like, what happens next? And we just sort of didn't know. The idea that was causing us great angst, of course. We've got programs and budgets and stuff to deal with, but it was the entire point. I think we eventually got there and realised that you just had to let this go and follow it and follow your heart on what you think you were doing and what the ideas were, and let how we might normally work completely go. And in doing that, we had to navigate, as Henry said, the idea of 5 different, so jazz banks in this as well as rates and the guys on the table. How we would actually negotiate stuff. Like, it's all great to say it, we're all going to work as a collective, but we actually had to agree something. So the idea was that we'd agree an overarching framework and a series of principles, and try and all agree those first, and then we'll work out how we're going to divide up the pie, because there were some pretty nice pieces of design work to go down there. So there's no doubt that there was a feeling of like a little bit of competition about who's going to get what bit. We didn't really know. We knew Tim had an idea, but we didn't know. We wasn't going to tell anybody what was going to go on. So that actually put I don't know about tension, but I think a healthy competitiveness between everybody. But even to agree those things was quite tricky. But it was an excellent opportunity for all the designers that are going to work in those studios. None of those studios are really going anywhere. They're all going to be building work over the next period of time and agree some of the key underlying principles of where we're going to go to. And I would recommend, any place to try and get that amount of alignment between those ideas. Now, it wasn't easily obtained. There was always discussion around all those points, and it wasn't a flashy document that we produced for it either. It was a series of drawings, and I'll show you some of them. And then just to get into the next piece of work, we then had to, some of them were obvious, like, jazz mix were working down on QE2, so the joining pieces set it out nicely with those guys to be able to work on that. Henry already had, I think, a leg into Key Street. On our one, we had to compete, so it was quite an interesting process to put a whole lot of ideas on the table. And then when we did get those ideas on the table, had to justify them, present to everybody, and everybody would critique it. So these are all of our competitors critiquing the work. That was actually excellent. It was actually really good. It was quite difficult, to be fair, but it was good. And then at times we actually had to agree join lines, so where everything met, and they had to be agreed in principle of how to do it. And then there were times when there wasn't agreement, and we had to all somehow get together and find some common ground and work it through. So it wasn't easy, but it was definitely worthwhile. I think that's all I've got to say, and I'll say a bit more on the design stuff a bit later.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Scott Greenhow, toku ingoa, ko Landlab and Mariana. I was just going to dive a bit deeper into what some of those kind of collective discussions and framework meant at the project level, and I think as David mentioned, at the collective level, we really delved into more than we usually would what the project as a whole meant, and then what the little pieces, what they actually meant, what part of the city they were from, and all part of the landscape they actually kind of would drive some of the design for those. And for Key Street in particular, the collective kind of landed on it as conceptually as a piece of basalt that sits between the city and the sea, and that gave us, for that project, some really rich kind of inspiration and drivers for the design of Quay Street as something that is really heavy. It is binding, and Auckland is kind of formed geologically of basalt, and a lot of the waterfront is, and it is also kind of porous. It can hold life and it filters water. So that kind of foundation, I guess, set the scene for some of the design work that then occurred at the table with mana whenua and then the artists. So I've got a couple of quick drawings of this is a site plan of how some of those ideas applied at that site scale to Quay Street, and then zooming in, this is a rough sketch of Te Wānanga at the top and Quay Street in the middle, and how those two projects talk to each other at the kind of surface level, and you'll see some ideas of kind of coastal, of drifts, basalt drifts, of coastal Hurakawa drifts, and emergent kind of ecology and texture and all those things that are driven. And then this was the design of where a representation of where they all landed for Quay Street. I think I will leave it there.
Okay, so to contrast that, just as Te Wānanga, I'm just going to talk to overall. Of course, the actual design was done by, the actual detail of this was done with Sarah Bishop and Nada Stanish. So this is the actual presentation package that we put to everybody. It's the idea of, we'd been working with Bernard, and the idea of Manakitanga, or how we were going to join this and create different relationships between things. And we actually found this shell on the site, or near the site. Can't actually get down there exactly. And it sort of represented where we were going, this idea of a complex community of things that were happening. And then the idea that we're working on a coastal ecology and a human ecology, and the idea that we're trying to bring these things together. We're trying to work from the moana, from the sea, from the land, and filter. So there was a cleansing process to that. The idea of the breath of Tangaroa on the breath and the coastal edge, and we were trying to create ourselves a coastal contrast to the solid. We were trying to create a coastal shelf. So we were creating a coastal shelf. We had holes in it so we could get light down into the water, so that the ecology of the sea could live. And we then had to put it into a plan form, argue with this with our collective partners, argue that we were going in the right direction, and this crazy edge, interacted complex edge, which we'd taken from the natural environment, could be used instead of what was originally proposed, which was a straight line. And we had to fit all the ferries in. And then work in 3D, the idea that we're having to do this and suck the ecology down into the ocean with the mussels, and get all the fish and everything back and alive. We tried to float one out in the middle of the further out, but that got dropped. Yeah. Runaway ferries and all, actually.
Thanks, David. So, in some ways, I feel a little like an imposter, because I could be Michael Hawes standing here, or I could be Stuart Houghton. But Henry asked me a moment or two ago over lunch if I would join this team on the stage, and after chatting about it for a moment or two, I said, yeah, no, that's fine, because in the beginning, when this process started, I had the special opportunity to be one of the people in the room from the beginning. And I think, there are moments in a long career where wonderful things happen to you, and for me, having that opportunity of being in the room and amongst friends, peers, colleagues, competitors, great designers was just a really special moment. And, you know, we had that opportunity to just talk about a place that we do all love and want to make better, and we had Phil's challenge of Auckland to Tamaki, and also Bernard's high aspirations in pushing us, and it was a really special thing, and I think, as Phil says, something specialer has come of it. So, you know, that is pretty special. I think, you know, there was another little bit of specialness for me in this, in that Megan Raitt started some of her early years in Waterfront School when I had the opportunity to work with her and have her as a friend, and it was really lovely in that later time for me to also have more time with Megan. And, you know, I think, as Phil said, you know, we all really miss her, and I think we like to still be able to see her in our cities, so just making that acknowledgement. So think just in a little bit in a design contribution sense. You might look at the waterfront and say, well, where is Boffimiskel and all of that? And I think in some ways we did a special thing as well, because Michael Hawes spent a lot of time doing a lot of drawings to prove to Auckland Transport that the worst possible idea would be to turn our buses right at the bottom of QE Square on Quay Street, where all the people are. And so sometimes as a designer, it's the thing that you prove shouldn't happen which is the best outcome, and to walk away and not be there is a really good outcome. So I think you know, we all owe a gratitude to Michael and the team collectively to work together to find a different transport solution to our buses, so that we actually have a waterfront which is actually connected and about pedestrians and people. And then the last thing I'm going to say, and he's going to hate me, and we started Henry saying various people were going to hate him for doing things, but, you know, the city owes an acknowledgement to Phil Wihongi. You know, he was the thinking and the brains and the muscle and the might and the bravery to put something that is different together. There is a saying, and I've used it many times for Phil, and I can't say it in Te Reo yet, but it's the one about it's not for the kumara to stay how sweet he is, and that is Phil through and through. But, you know, he has made a really great contribution in this role that he's had at Auckland Council for us all. So I just really, sorry Phil, but I am going to acknowledge that, and just make sure we all continue to acknowledge it. So that's my part in what I'd like to say.
Thanks, David, Scott and Rachel, and just like to reiterate thanks to Phil, and acknowledge all the hard work he's done in Tamaki over the last couple of years.